Oh, so I'm sorry about that. As per usual, for one, I mean, like we weren't late or anything, but like the there's always something with how I'm doing this broadcast, and for once I try to be proactive. Every time that I've done it so far this week, I do it at the last minute, and then I forget that I have to put the title in there and the description and all this other stuff. And so for once, I'm like, yeah, I'll just set it up ahead of time. I'll schedule it like any normal person would, and then it'll just go on its own. Yeah, no, here comes 10 o'clock, and all of a sudden, just it goes for me, kicks Bob out. And then I'm just sitting there watching the countdown. I'm messaging Bob like, "Hey man, sorry. You should be able to click the link, and hopefully you can come back in." So yeah, I'm sorry about that, man.
No worries. No, it's not my first time something like that's happened. So
Right.
figure it must be all right. Just keep calm, keep breathing.
Well, thank you, man. Thank you for being here this morning and giving us your time. I know that it's the afternoon for you, and being in beautiful Portugal. I'm sure there's other things you would much rather be doing at this point than sitting here and talking about coding. But I thank you for giving us your time.
Yeah, no worries. You'd be surprised actually how much I like this kind of stuff.
Even I knew you were gonna say that.
Yeah.
Like actually,
everything in balance. Yeah, but
right.
It's too hot outside anyways now, so we're sitting underneath the AC and doing this.
Yeah,
good way to pass the time.
Yeah, my wife and I were just taking a look at what's going on in terms climate-wise around the globe, but I don't know. That's another topic for another day, because that'll take the whole show to even.
That'll turn it quickly into a depressing podcast.
Yeah, that's the biggest part of it. Yeah. So, were you? I didn't even get to ask you, and I know it was probably a long shot, but are you going to be at Inbound this year?
Nope. Unfortunately, that's something that we did discuss it briefly, but we have to keep in mind, like, we're a relatively small HubSpot partner. I'm pretty active in most of the HubSpot communities, but relatively speaking, the cost of getting our team over there is just the tickets and then just the actual flights and everything. That is, for us right now, is not really in the cards. So yeah, I would love to be there. I already see the stories and the pictures and the footage and everything, but it's not happening. Maybe in the future.
I was gonna say, don't count yourself out. For everybody that doesn't know already, Bob, tell everybody a little bit about yourself, your background in HubSpot. Where you're at with your partnership with HubSpot as well.
Yeah. So my name is Bob. I am HubSpot super admin, I guess. I'm not really sure what marketing automation consultant, B2B demand gen marketing enthusiast, HubSpot power user. I don't know. I have a bunch of labels, I guess, that I use whenever it's needed. And I'm a big enthusiast about HubSpot, not just the marketing stuff, even though technically I'm a marketing automation consultant. That's mostly because of Gradient, the company that I work for, which is a Dutch B2B marketing agency. We are a HubSpot partner, but primarily we're a B2B marketing agency. So we always say we're that first, and then HubSpot comes second. Basically, it's a tool for us to do the job. But more and more, we also help companies implement HubSpot as a CRM or for the Service Hub. So we're gravitating. I wouldn't say we're gravitating away from marketing, but that's another part of stuff that we're doing, which I really love, of course, because that means I get to use more and more of HubSpot. So that's part of my history. I think that's a nice summary for now.
And what drove you into this space?
I used to start out like way back, for me anyway. It's 10 years ago, something like that, as just an online marketeer back then at a translation agency. I didn't know any. I just came from university. I didn't know anything about like marketing. I was handy with computers and I know how to write a little bit, so I jumped into that role there and just explored a lot of things. And it was actually I think it was Copy Blogger back then, which was might still be sort of a collab, I think, between HubSpot and this other company to to showcase how you wrote good inbound copy.
Yeah.
And through that, I discovered HubSpot and all the stuff about like doing like an automatic flow. You could build a form and then have like an email follow up, and then wait a couple days and automatically send another email. This was like magic to me, and that I think that was appealing to this, I guess, process or system junkie inside of me. That's
Yeah.
actually always been there, because
Mhm.
this is something that's been fascinating on my journey last like 10 years or so, is that it's been a journey of self-discovery as much as career development. You know, I've discovered that what gets me bouncing like a Duracell bunny is the prospect of analyzing a process and going, oh, if we want it to be like this, then we need to, I can sort of like rapidly extrapolate potential paths, right? That's, I
Yeah.
don't know, that's how I always try to explain it. It's maybe a bit vague, but
No, I fully understand that.
yeah. So that you can understand, I mean, with all the tools that HubSpot gives you, and obviously the business challenges that come with what most companies ask for, that for me is like the ideal playground to go and say like, okay, if this is the challenge, we can use these and these tools within HubSpot. And it's not just HubSpot, right? It's the stuff outside of it, like I was mentioning in our talk before this, make.com, Integromat, using that to link HubSpot to whatever other type of, if it's like a database or software or whatever, just give me a week and I'm going to go dive into it, figure out what it does, and then how to connect it to HubSpot, and we'll make something out of it. So
Nice.
yeah, I always compare myself a little bit to MacGyver, the TV show. I'm sure you know it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I remember. Yep.
Yeah. So for a while I used like the title marketing MacGyver. It's still on my LinkedIn, I think.
Nice.
That's me. You know, I go like, give me a paperclip and a piece of gum, and I come out with
I was just gonna say, it's always about the paperclip. Get that, and you got everything else. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's what I like to do. It's just building stuff like that, and that's over the years I've gravitated more and more towards that, and I started to understand like, hey, that's who I am. That's what I'm good at. What drives me, and now I'm seeking out more and more, let's say, opportunities in my career to sort of enable that side of me to be
even better. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So that being said, that's the even better part, right? That immediately always makes me think of GPT, because that's the era that we're in. And so I don't know how I shouldn't even say necessarily in tune, because it is so much all the time in every single direction, in every single profession, all, just all at once. Where is your sort of tuning fork when it comes to AI news? Like where do you fall? Is it specifically more towards marketing, or are you paying attention to like other realms? How it's applying to, like, let's say agriculture, or just social measuring and that?
It's I remember that in the early days, I'm struggling to think what the first sort of encounter with ChatGPT was. If I think back on December now, it was just there all of a sudden, and then I can't even really remember what for me the first revelation was. But the first couple of months, I mostly suffered from sort of overwhelm, because it was everywhere, and I quickly understood like, hey, you can do so much with this, but it's like you get the choice stress. You're going, where do we even start? And for a long time I was just not sure how to start using it, until I just started using it at some point. Like, that was a case that came around, and started I just asked ChatGPT for something. I don't even remember what it was, but and then you start to go like, wait a second, this is it's chat, right? It says right there, it's best used, I think, as a back and forth. And when we're talking about news, I think that's an interesting thing to notice, is that for me, I don't know if you recognize this, but like 9 out of 10 of this stuff feels like, how do I use ChatGPT to write my SEO blog for me, or to write my LinkedIn post for me? And quickly already, I mean, the main thing is it's all about the prompt. You can't just say, hey, write me a LinkedIn post and get something good. You need to prime it, and you need to do all that kind of stuff. But I think something that also a lot of people miss still is the fact that, especially in terms of ChatGPT anyway, is that you can have a back and forth with the thing. And the more you treat it like it's an actual person on the other side,
Mm-hmm.
the better I feel that the results get, or the more natural it feels, and the easier it is for yourself also to start understanding, like, wait, I could just ask it and get an answer for it
Right.
in so many areas. Like, this is where I'm reading Dune, the book, after the movie, right?
Great story.
Yeah, great story. Yeah, I've read it way back, and I figured, hey, I'm gonna reread it again. But if you like, the first novel is pretty alright, but the second, the novels after that are pretty intense. Like, there's a lot of stuff going on. It's not really clear exactly why stuff is happening, at least not to me, because it's a bit complex stuff. And I figured, hey, maybe I'll just ask ChatGPT, like, hey, can you explain the meaning of this third book to me? And then it gave me some answers, and I just picked some stuff out of that. I was like, can you narrow in on that a little bit more, And then you get a little discussion, a back and forth, and that's the fascinating part about this for me, is that you can have that feel almost like a real human being that you're chatting with, and that can give you results like that.
It turns it into a very like real story in a sense for you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I can imagine that for like more old-fashioned people or just older people. Yeah, it may be a little bit scary, or you're like, oh, it's a robot, it's talking back to me. How does that work? But it just feels. I've always grown up with technology and always been interested in, oh, how does this work? Just let me
Same.
try and understand it. And it feels so natural to explore these depths of the system, to go into it and really go and say, just try and push it to the limits rather than use it. That's kind of my point, is that it feels very narrowing or limiting to just go, hey, let's use ChatGPT for writing copy.
Mm-hmm.
I get that
Yeah.
that's, because it's a field that it gets applied to, and that's what most people find the most immediate use out of, also to run a business or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But what I found interesting is you were doing this, I think, in one of your earlier episodes with Christine, as well as to use it. For example, what we're experimenting with a gradient. I don't have anything to show you, unfortunately, because that's still like very early prototype. But to basically create these different, rather than AI, IA, interactive agents, that we can basically say, all right, we're going to prime one chat to be all about gathering the initial information about the company. We're going to give it like inputs, and then it's going to say, all right, this is the brief. This is the company. These are the products. This is the business model. Blah blah. And we're going to have another agent that we're going to give that input, and that's basically going to say, all right, give me the buyer personas, and we might get the output of that and then give it to another agent that's primed to receive buyer persona input and turn that into, I don't know, a campaign plan. That's simplifying it, but I mean, you could have this web of interactive agents all working like that together, obviously controlled by a human being, because you can't be too careful with this stuff. But for us as an agency, that's the really interesting part, is how do we use this to save time, right? Because especially customers are going to expect it. What you used to charge, I don't know, 20 hours for or something, they are going to expect it. You use technology like AI to speed it up. So yeah.
I was about to ask, so how have you guys gotten into that? Have you broached that process and what that looks like in terms of like how you're going to start restructuring pricing and things like that?
Yeah,
If you can't talk about it,
of course,
totally
yeah. No, it's definitely a hot topic of discussion. Fortunately, the owners or the team, I mean, it's not just the owners, everybody has noticed that AI is here, and it's here to stay. It's not some fad that's going to be reduced in a couple of years. It's accelerating, and we need to get on board. So we need to figure this stuff out, and it's challenging, I think, because you see companies pop up left and right. They're doing such amazing, smart things with AI that they came up with really fast, and really like daring stuff that for us is also a little bit, because you have an established agency, right? You need to go and say, you can't just overnight change your business model. You're going to have to sort of like an oil tanker, ease into it. Yeah. But we're definitely experimenting with where can we use AI to speed things up. And it's not like, I mean, we started some trainings like a lot of other agencies have, like how can you use AI for marketing, for example, just to inspire our customers and things like that. But this is actually a project that I'm on right now is to, as an agency, we used to come from a performance marketing background, so setting up SCA campaigns, things like that. So when you want to create landing pages for certain keywords, and let's say that you want to create landing pages for 50 keywords, and they're all very different, that's going to take forever creating all those individual landing pages, right? So using ChatGPT or OpenAI, actually, because we don't want to feed the open area of it, but just the API part of it. Using OpenAI, Make.com, and HubSpot together, we're now prototyping just a simple Airtable database that has the keywords, and then the keywords go into a bunch of OpenAI prompts to write copy for specific sections on a landing page template, right? You got your intro, your title, your USP 1, USP 2, USP 3, something like that, and then from there on, once we have all that copy, Make.com then assigns that to areas on a HubSpot landing page template. So once you've got the table of all the keywords in a row, you just click run on the Make.com scenario, and it spits out 50 landing pages in one go, and they're in HubSpot in draft, ready to be published.
That's
and
nuts.
It takes like a minute, not that long anyway. And that was like a really cool case to work on, because it doesn't stop there, right? The next step, you could easily go and say, okay, once these are published, create the ad campaigns for it using something like Integromat, or Make.com.
Awesome.
And that just it takes, if you set that up right, that could take like 5 minutes tops to do what a performance marketing specialist, a HubSpot specialist, maybe a developer for a template or whatnot, copywriter. They would do that in, I don't know, 20 hours or something.
Yeah, right. And that's, I think, like, I mean, so many more people are wanting to, right? They're wanting to start businesses now because it's a little bit easier to do. And now I don't know how it's going to shift. Obviously, you get what you pay for. So better agencies are still going to be able to like hold, their top tier pricing and everything. But I do think it is going to become a case where you're going to have these, I don't know what you're going to call them, like, sort of like shotgun startup teams or something like that, where, it's someone like you, and with what and how to wield it, right, with the tools that you've got, and somebody gives you that project of like, okay, here's our client, here's their startup business, this is what they need, this is what they need set up for them, they need this, let's say, type of I don't know, they need this type of campaign set up, and like here's their business model, they don't know what their personas are, any of that, and here you can go and get that all set up for them, right? And I'm not saying like the click of a button or anything like that, but in a lot less time than you would have otherwise needed to take, and with a lot less people, right?
Absolutely. And I think the critical thing there is, like, it's not going to steal people's jobs, not right away anyway, unless you're going to bury your head in the sand now and not look into this stuff. But it's definitely going to, like we said earlier, right? The power of the prompt it's all about that prompt, and you need to know what to ask it to do, right? And that requires that you are knowledgeable in the field that you're applying it to. So, I mean, I'm sure we're going to talk about development in a bit. That was the promise, right?
Yeah, no, we definitely need to dive into it.
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe this is a nice segue then, right? One thing that I found is that it's not just, hey, ChatGPT, write me some code for this particular thing. You need to think like a developer a little bit, not in terms of, I need to think about the exact syntax of the code that I'm writing, but you do need to sort of analyze the process, like what things do I need to happen in which order, what do I need to, and you still need to be able to brief it to do certain things and understand the results. But if you don't know how to write code, good news, because today you don't have to, / it just became a lot easier.
Right.
It's still handy to know some code or to know how to read it and analyze it and understand why something might not be going right away, because you probably won't. But it's, for me anyway. I mean, I'll tell you the story, right? This is a nice segue then in how to get to the code part. I'm like I said, I love the process stuff and all this stuff, and we've had a lot of cases in the past, either with Gradient or earlier endeavors in my career, where company, or there's a business case where it's basically, all right, can we connect this process, or can we build a process for this and that? And I know that that it's possible to do that. I just know that at some point in that process, you're going to need a developer to write some code, either like a integration or some API calls, or some web page that needs to get created, CSS that needs to be written, whatever. It can be anything. And that used to be always sort of a roadblocker, either because we didn't have a developer handy, or because we did have one, but there wasn't budget to hire them. Usually it was an external party, or whatever other reasons that we had that was a showstopper. And I've always thought to myself, like, I've actually contemplated a couple times, like, hey, I'm going to go and take a course on Code Academy or something to try and learn JavaScript, because I find that I need it so often.
Yeah.
And that's why ChatGPT has been such a huge thing for me. It's been the main thing that I've been experimenting with anyway with ChatGPT, is that it knows how to write code. It knows all these syntaxes and all these different languages. And now I'm not a developer, right? I'm still
Right.
If you would ask me to create an app or whatever, I would not be able to do so right now. But the type of code that you typically need for HubSpot actions, custom code actions, or like you want to modify a form script, or even build a CRM card, which it's a little bit more complex. I think for like a diehard developer who works at like an IT agency and builds fantastic apps, are tiny little things. They go like, oh yeah, it's like a hobby thing. I'll just clickety click and it's done. Whereas for me, that's it. Just to be able to do that kind of stuff enables so much more for me as a non-developer. And that's always been sort of fascinating about this, is that now I've got a way to basically say to ChatGPT, write me some stuff, and just from what I know of development, right? I've picked up stuff along the way. I can kind of read it, and if I don't understand it, even I just ask ChatGPT, right? This goes back to the chatting thing. Is it writes me some code, and I try and read it and go like, all right, this bit, what does this bit do that you just wrote for me? And it's go, oh, it does this and that. And if I still don't understand it, I go, can you say that in layman's terms? Yeah. Explain it further, or make it dumb it down for me. I don't know anything about development.
Right.
And just by chatting like that, I get these. I don't know if we can screen share, but is that something I can do here?
Do you have that's the only part of this that
you haven't explored yet? Or?
No, that I probably should have before we started doing this, right?
All right. Okay. Well, I can explain it anyway. What I've done is I've built a chat in ChatGPT, just a prompt that I started, and I called it Bob's Node.js Sensei. Just a label name, whatever. And I just basically started with, okay, let's can you just give me some instructions, or I basically tried to turn it into a free version of Code Academy, right? I said, give me exercises to do and write JavaScript. And it worked for a little bit, but I quickly realized, wait, this is not the right way to go about it. I should probably, instead of that, go and say, here's a bit of JavaScript. Help me explain what's going on here. And then I had a nice bit of JavaScript with like terms like require or axiom, or just some bits of code that I went like, all right, I see this happening. I kind of get what's going on here, but can you explain to me exactly what this line of code does? And I've built that up as a sort of a repository of learnings about the basics of the HubSpot custom code action Node.js language. And every time I found something new, I just went back to that chat and basically said, hey, I found this line of code. Can you explain to me? And every once in a while, I would just say, can you summarize the last bits that we've done, add it to like a repository? And I just keep it like a running repository of concepts of code that sort of helped me understand, so that I can now. I mean, I'm still not a full-on developer, but I can,
Right, but you understand a
compared
lot
to
more now. Yeah,
yeah, compared to 6 months, I can sort of troubleshoot and code my way out of the issues that we have, and that's
nice.
just been super empowering. Yeah,
That's what I've tried to explain to most people, that like the more, I don't know anybody who has started using any form of generative AI that has gotten worse at anything, right?
yeah,
Like everyone I know that's used it and has worked with it has just gotten better at whatever it is that they have been doing before. So just proof positive once again. But yeah, once you start working with this stuff, it becomes addictive, because B, you can do so much more. Like you realize it, and what Bob's talking about is like spot on. I wasn't even, likewise, I wasn't even doing the same thing this past week. I was trying to work something out, and I'm like, you know what? I ought to know how to work with HubSpot API. I really need to get into this. I need to learn how to do this. And I thought it would, like like you would think that it would be daunting, but then you remember like, oh shoot, I've got this like expert coder assistant with me that I can use, who's going to be able to help walk me through all of this stuff. Sure enough, like here I am, I'm working in Visual Studio for the first time ever,
yeah,
and learning how to do, way underneath yourself, right? Like if you're not a developer, I am like a speck on the floor in the far corner looking at you at this point, right? So I'm definitely beyond wet behind the ears, but I'm on my way now.
yeah,
Where it would have taken me how many YouTube, like, okay, I'll say this much in terms of like where we're going with education, right? It went from strictly in the classroom. You had to be in the classroom, had to pay for the classes. There was really no other way to do that. Then we started YouTube University, right? And that's been awesome. Like, we've got online courses as well, sort of battling against YouTube University. But now in like 2020 plus, yeah, most anything you wanted to know about coding or anything digital, you learned on YouTube. It's the most up-to-date place to learn, right? Like it's, to me, it's gotten to the point where if you're learning out of books right now, it's not that I don't think that's a bad thing. It's that it may be out of date. I don't know when those
it's
books were printed, right? But digital stuff is digital. I can see a video, yesterday about some new tech that came out in AI. I'm not going to read about in a book till 6 months from now, right? So, and now with GPT, it's like you have the best teacher in a sense at your fingertips. So it goes well beyond YouTube University. It's like now you have that teacher working right there with you as a tutor, right?
absolutely, and it's again the back and forth. I think with the learning, a big thing is that as somebody who's learning, you also
Mm,
need to, or you need to know, I think you develop an ideal way for yourself to learn. And like a traditional curriculum, this is also why I never got into the Code Academy thing. I wanted to learn JavaScript so that I could
mm,
write API calls and things like that. And then you go to the Code Academy and they start you off with like, hello world, or here's a recipe for cookies. How to JavaScript something around that.
right.
And you look at that and you go, I'm probably going to miss some core concepts if I don't do this. But at the same time, it's like looking up Mount Everest and going like, oh, I need to be all the way up there. But the road is so long. Whereas
Yeah.
with now that I've got ChatGPT here, right, I can create my own curriculum. And the
Hmm.
only thing you really need is your own curiosity and
Yeah.
ability to ask the right questions. And then you can go and say, okay, I want to learn JavaScript. Just tell me the first basic concepts of JavaScript, ChatGPT. And he goes, okay, these are some things. All right, let's talk about this. And then once I started to understand a little bit, what I also did was go back to ChatGPT and say, okay, so if I get this right, it works like this. Is that correct? And then you get feedback where it's like, yes, that's exactly right. Or it might be something like, almost, it's
Yeah.
actually a little bit more like this. And having that back and forth and the ability to ask you questions and then go like, all right, now let's try something more complex. I feel like I'm ready to do some API calls. Um, let's try that. And I put in some sample code that I think is about an
Hmm.
API call, and then I just ask, I like a complete, I don't know anything about this. Is this an API call? Or even just determine like the grammar that you use to describe it. Like, do you say,
Right.
I'm making a call or I'm posting a request. How does that work? How do these things relate to one another? And ChatGPT can answer that stuff like a true teacher, better than a
Yes.
teacher probably. And
Yeah.
because you can force the teacher to answer exactly those questions that you have at your own pace, as fast as you can type it, basically.
Mhm.
And it's always there for you. You don't have to
Right.
go to like some school or pay for it or other than
And
that.
it's there to explain it in any way that you need to in terms of understanding it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you can constantly feed it like, have I done it right here? This is how I've applied it. There's just,
An
even in its
interesting thing I
limited
picked up this
framework.
past week was the or not statement. So when you ask it things and you say like, "Have I done this right?" to include or not at the end of it, and I think it's a way of subverting GPT's core functionality, or core purpose, let's say, which is to help you, right?
Yeah,
And so it's supposed to help cut down on hallucinations, because if the core purpose is to help you, the hallucinations may be a side effect of, well, I don't want to tell him he's wrong, or I don't want to be not useful or not helpful to him, so I better give him something, right? Um, and I have actually seen like a couple turnarounds where it thinks for a while and then comes back and is like, actually, there isn't a way of doing this, blah, blah, blah. Whereas before, I have experienced cases where I'll ask it about something prior to trying to do coding. I'll ask it about trying to do something complex with a workflow, and it'll say, "Oh yeah, of course you can. You just go into workflow, then you just open your options, and you just go down to the option that says this, right?" And it's like, but that
that
doesn't
option's not
exist.
there.
So
Yeah.
you're just making shit up now. Like,
Yeah. I've had this so much with it. You need to um, be aware of this as well. I think that it's not a magic bullet.
mhm.
It just cuts down a lot on time, and it can help you do it yourself rather than hiring a developer. I think that's sort of the promise here. Um, uh, but you still, like, it will. I've had this a couple times that it suggests stuff. For example, it's got the knowledge cutoff, right? So
Yeah.
September 2021, I think right now is the endpoint. But HubSpot's APIs have evolved since then. Some of them
Yes.
have gone up a version, completely
Oh
changing
yeah.
the syntax of some of the calls. So you ask it, hey, for example, I wanted to do that today as an example to show
I
how
was
you
gonna
can.
say, do you have does it have screen share on your end, or
I do see a share button here, so I'm just gonna
okay?
press it, and people, if you all drop out, then just come back in.
It should maybe ask you if you need to allow stuff.
Yeah, I'm just selecting the screen now. I think I might just go into. This is probably going to give the Hall of Mirrors effect, but here we
There
go.
we go.
What do you see?
Baller, we got it.
Cool, excellent. Right, so this is. I was just writing a prompt here before this because I was really trying to prep this way, but then I remembered like there's so much back and forth that it's really hard to show you an exact example of this. A couple of things I want to show. First, this is the what I called before, right? The Node.js Sensei. It's the name of the tab
Mhm.
here. So I'll just scroll somewhere around here. Um,
I love that you name yours as well, too. By the way,
yeah,
like,
that's so important to do that, I think.
yeah,
Just for your own sanity, because this is a shared account that we use across the entire agency. So we have a whole bunch of stuff on the left side that it's all new chat or stuff that ChatGPT named it, but I just give it some names here. So I'm just
nice.
looking at so here, just an example, right? I'm just in a chat and I'll say something like, in a particular example of HubSpot custom code action, the code starts with the following line. There's this. And this is just, I've understood by now that this is just a way to sort of nest your main function within
Mhm.
like this is the main thing that's going on, right? And you can have helper functions somewhere else, but this is where the main stuff happens. So I just basically said, all right, I have no idea what this is. Can you explain what's going on here? And it says, okay, it gives you some stuff. I won't read all of this, but here's an example, it gives you some code examples of this as well. And then I say, all right, there's a couple of things I don't understand yet. Let's start with exports. expose functions from a module. What does that mean? Expose module. And it just goes, and that's just how I sort of constantly pick it apart and try to understand it more and more.
Right.
And what's also funny about this is I was watching, I heard Christine say this earlier as well, is that it helps to be nice to ChatGPT.
Yes.
I do this automatically. This just comes naturally to treat it like a human being and say things like thanks or oh, awesome, it's working, or
right.
things like that, or just simple things like this. Okay, so back to the example below, could I just sort of the natural language that I feed it with, I feel like that's sort of helping this kind of stuff,
It does. I feel that like that is the case in terms of when you're working with it. I don't know. Like, of course, now you have custom instructions too, which kind of starts, blurring the lines a little bit between how you have to talk to it within the conversation versus like how it's going to respond to you already. Because I feel like that's actually taken one step away, right? Because now you're sort of able to pre-program GPT to be nice to you regardless, in a sense, right? So it almost gives you the ability to not have to be nice to it. But anyhow, yeah, I don't want to distract. But I fully agree that.
Yeah, it just helps a lot. I feel it makes it just comes naturally, I think, for me to just have that conversational tone with it.
Because you're working with someone, right? Yeah. I mean, even though it's a something, it's like, I just look at it as a someone. I don't really.
A whole host of someone.
I don't distinguish. Yeah.
There's a book by Brandon Sanderson. It's just a fantasy-like book. It's about a guy, the many lives of Stephen something. I forgot his last name. It's super schizophrenic, I guess, just to summarize it. And I'm not sure if that's the correct clinical term, probably not. But it's a guy who has extreme multiple personality disorder, basically. And he's in his head, he's got like at least 16 other characters that he actually manifests them in front of himself, and they have to sit somewhere in the room, and they have to all pass through a door before you can close the door,
Oh, wow.
But each of those he has sort of created in his head as a sort of an agent to help with a particular type of problem, right? There's a guy who's really good at solving murders. There's a guy who's really good at programming. There's a guy who's really good at all kinds of stuff. And it reminds me a little bit of that. Like I'm talking to somebody within the context of this chat. The guy I'm talking to is a developer. He's good at every language and he can pump code really fast. I might go into another one, and that is going to be my go-to guy for, I don't know, history, or somebody who can explain literature to me, So that's how I treat them all, as sort of individual people inside of this whole area of ChatGPT, I think, and that's really cool. Yeah, you could give them names, I guess, as well.
Yeah, I have. I've started to name mine only because that's what helps me remember what each one of them does.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. I'm just trying to sort of get some sort of a sense of. I think this one. Do you still see my screen, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. All right. So yeah, this one's an example of a whole bunch of code that. This is just sort of to showcase how I go back and forth to help it write me code specifically for HubSpot custom action. I'll just give you a little bit of context about this one. This was for a company where we had a big service hub set up, and for their support agents, they wanted to introduce other SLA metrics than the ones that HubSpot gives you. By default, there's first reply time and time to close. And what they wanted was, and I know HubSpot is working on this, but at the time of writing, they weren't, next reply time. So that means the time between, it's an SLA for the time between the last reply from the customer since the last reply of your agent, right? So every next reply that comes in needs to be handled within a certain amount of time as well. But that metric wasn't there, but it was very important for this company that it did exist. So we figured, hey, we can write that with some custom code. We had the operations up there, so we figured, hey, we could probably build something. So what this bit of code had to do was basically say, okay, we're going to get as an input the time that the ticket was last responded to by the customer. And based on the SLA of the attached company, we're going to add an X amount of hours, 6 hours, 4 hours, or 2 hours, if it was like a low, medium, or high priority ticket based on the SLA.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's there were two support teams, so a US one and an EU one. They worked in different time zones, obviously, so their start and end times would differ, because obviously you only want the SLA to count down during working hours. But then you need to know, all right, which one of the working hours do we need to apply? It's also something that HubSpot doesn't support, right? It's only one set of working hours. Then they wanted to exclude weekends, obviously, but also public holidays. So what we wanted to do is basically build a table of HubSpot, a HubDB table of public holidays, and check against that to basically see, all right, the resulting time that we're in, is that on a holiday? If so, we need to add hours. So the principle of it was, all right, we're going to add an X amount of hours to that last reply date. And if it's basically add 1 hour, check if it is a public holiday. If it is, add 24 hours. If it's not, go to the next step. If it's weekend, add 24 hours, go back to the first one, check if it's a holiday. If not, go to the next step, right? So it would sort of repeat that cycle of checking first if it's a holiday, then if it's a weekend, and then if it's outside of working hours. And it would do that for every hour that it needed to add until it was out of hours, basically. So then you end up on the last day. And that basically ensured that it wouldn't, it would calculate a next reply time due date that you could sort the tickets by. That was never outside of working hours for both support teams. That was never on a weekend and never on a public holiday. So that's just a long sort of context. And the way and the way that we built that in the end, or we first had it developed by a developer, which worked well because we hadn't sort of figured this out yet. But then later I went back in and sort of recreated it myself with some tweaks in there, using ChatGPT by basically giving it that instruction that I just said as a bit of text, right? In preparation for this, I actually wrote it out here.
You give it the scenario that you're working with, right?
This is the briefing. This was the initial prompt that I gave it. I don't know if you can read. It may be a bit small. I don't know if you can zoom here. Yeah. So it literally says, right, all right, let's write a bit of code here. The purpose of this code is this, just all of the context that it needs to sort of understand what needs to happen. And this is what you need to know, right? As the person who's briefing the AI, you need to understand, okay, this is how this solution needs to work. And it's all right if you don't know that right away, but that's going to, the fuzzier your briefing, the more troubleshooting you're going to have to do. And that's the same as if you were telling a designer, hey, I want a new logo. If that's all you're going to brief him with, and you're going to get something that's way different from your expectations. Whereas if you have a lot of input to give him, then it's going to be more accurate to what you want. And the same applies here. So you got to understand how to brief it, basically. And the clearer you understand the process that you're trying to get to, the better this will go. And then also what I also do here is...
What I want to try to highlight for people is, once again, this isn't necessarily like, okay, this is something that like Bob could copy and paste into a post on LinkedIn, and you could theoretically call this a prompt, right? But that's what I try to get through to people is like, all Bob did was he just told GPT the story of the problem that he's got and how he wants to find the solution, right? That's not necessarily, like, you don't necessarily have to go to prompt school to learn how to do that, which you, like what he pointed out earlier, you just need to have the creativity. You just need to be able to think about your problem and be able to walk through your problem and be able to explain it to somebody as if you were, it's no different than if something's wrong with your car and you go to the mechanic and you got to tell the mechanic just a roundabout way of what's wrong with your car, right? Yeah, you're not going to know what's wrong with it, but that's why the mechanic is there, right?
Yeah, I think that's like the main skill to come out of this is communication almost, it's like how well are you able to articulate your problem. And it's it's been the same like I said earlier, it's if you're briefing an agency, like any agency or like a freelancer or anyone, like a colleague, the clearer you're able to articulate what you need, the better the results are going to be that you're going to get back. And this is no different with ChatGPT. It may sound like technology and scary stuff, but it's really a reflection of how good you are at asking the right questions,
Mhm.
I think, in a lot of ways. And this is just an example, right? I mean, now you see that it spits out code. What I
Yep.
also did here is just give it the if you create a new custom code action in HubSpot, it gives you like a sort of a template that's already there, very basic stuff. I added a bit in there to help it connect to a private app, which you need to, if you need to make API calls, you need it to have that. And then this helps it to sort of contextualize, I think, the code. Otherwise, you're going to get
Right.
some code that wouldn't work in the context of a HubSpot custom code action, right? And then it gives you this. And this is probably not going to work right away if I put it in there. But something that I also learned to do was basically tell it, all right, make logs. You know, it's basically saying, all right, I'm just going to assume that people listening now, if you know nothing about code, logging is very important because it helps you troubleshoot, right? It basically says at certain steps in your code, it will log something that the current state of some properties that you put in there, it's going to spit that out in a log, so that you know you can go into your log afterwards and see, all right, the first 5 steps it executed correctly, and these were the outputs, but at step 6 it got caught, and then this is the reason why it got caught. So rather than the thing saying it threw an error, you know, you want to know exactly why the error occurred. So that's another thing that if you're going to experiment with this, very important, tell it to log the outputs, so that when you then go into HubSpot and you can run a test record through it, that it's actually going to give you some logs in return that you can then feed back into ChatGPT and say, hey, this is what I'm going to get, this is what I'm getting back as an error. What's going wrong here? And then ChatGPT will tell you, oh, it looks like this is going to go wrong. I already implemented a fix in the code here. And then you try that again, and then it's just like a constant back and forth.
Whoop.
Yeah, that happens.
Now you're sharing all of the share.
No, it's the whole mirrors. There we go. Yeah.
No, I love that because, namely because of the fact that, like you say, between the combination of what I was telling, I think I posted it yesterday. One of my favorite things to do, and what I've noticed with custom instructions, right, is that you can, what I used to do, and I say used to, like this stuff has been out for so long.
2 weeks ago.
I've noticed, I was going to say, like, you've noticed the same thing, right? Like time just kind of passes differently all of a sudden, right?
Yeah, I mean, just before you go off, you're saying custom instructions. I've kind of seen this come by. I haven't gone into this yet. I know there's like a billion different things that I can do with ChatGPT that I haven't even begun to explore yet. And the tricky thing is that, you know, obviously it's not tricky per se, but I have a full-time job for the agency, and I'm helping customers use HubSpot. You know, if I have time to mess with ChatGPT, it's it's
on off hours.
It's on off hours, or in the portion of personal development where it's relevant, you know, or it actually happens to be part of a project. But yeah, I unfortunately I can't spend like every waking hour delving into this, and it's not my only hobby. So
yeah, everybody's like,
behind.
how do you stay on top of this shit? How do you stay on top of AI and keep your finger on stuff? And it's like, look, I'm up at 6 a.m. So from like 6 to 7 while everybody else is sleeping, I'm reading a blog and I'm reading an article. I'm catching up on Feedly while I'm walking my dog, and I'm posting while I'm walking my dog, and then I'm scheduling posts for later in the day. And then when it comes to GPT, I have a very, very loving and understanding wife. And I think, you know, thankfully, maybe not thankfully, don't have kids. I do have 2 little dogs, but yeah, I have a little bit of extra time, and I, you know, consider myself lucky to have the extra time. Christine just showed me, or just posted about another certification she got. There's a bunch of new Google certifications that I have to go take. Like all of my so where everybody else has a hobby that they do, I change my hobbies to become what the thing is that I want to know about. So
Yeah.
rather than going and hiking or going and do other stuff, I kind of just put all of that on hold and change the focus to be just all AI.
I mean, yeah, if that's the way you want to go, then that's a very valid option. I think. What I
That's
think
the
is
only way I
interesting.
could do it. Otherwise, I
Yeah,
wouldn't know much more than the average person either.
yeah, and I think, I mean, just maybe spin that around for folks who are going, I don't want to spend every waking hour going into ChatGPT. I've got other hobbies that I find more interesting,
Right.
or whatever else you got going on in your life. I found it interesting to, rather than doing it that way, is to incorporate ChatGPT into those hobbies.
Yeah.
I'm a photographer, a hobby photographer, amateur. I
Mhm.
might ask ChatGPT about lens settings or specifications like that, or
I do it all the time because I work with Midjourney. So
yeah,
like, and I told you I used to be, I was not a photographer, somewhat of a very amateur. I took photography in college, but that's about as far as it went. But I do remember, right, about like different settings and stuff. And so when I was doing stuff in Midjourney, I would add like, oh, a photograph taken with Nikon D360 and then give
yep,
some settings to it, but not everything that's going on today, right? And you could just ask it like, hey, give me a digital camera that is great for taking pictures of animals out in the wild during the golden hour of the day with the lens type and camera settings as well, right? And then
yep.
you get this spit out like sentence long thing of settings, including like the camera and all of that. You throw that into Midjourney or whatever it is you're doing, and beautiful. You get beautiful stuff that you.
Which I thought was, it's crazy interesting, that part. I mean, Midjourney is another area that I would really love to delve into more. I haven't had the time yet, but
Oh man, I love it.
it's, yeah, just the sheer realism of that stuff. Like, I'm not easily scared in a way of going like, oh, that hobby is gonna, or that profession is gonna disappear. But
Mhm.
I imagine that photographers look at that and go, huh? I mean,
I mean,
it's not. I mean, the big thing is it's not real, right? So if you want to, like,
right.
you want to take photos of a wedding, that you can't just generate
That's
photos of a wedding, right? It's
that's
still,
the thing is like
yeah,
it gets rid of the norm, I suppose, right? Because the norm of photography is stock photography, right? It's
yeah.
not
It raises
really
it's the same with content, right?
raises the bar. Yeah,
Raises the
exactly. You
bar.
have to
Yeah,
be better with
absolutely.
what you were doing before, or have to know how to not necessarily like work around, but you have to know how to work with what you have going on. Right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
one of the interesting thing, I don't know if you saw the post, but I promised people I would mention something about it. Um, I saw this story this past week. I have seen a lot of stories like this, and it's not. You have to understand, it doesn't like it doesn't miff me because of the context or anything like that. What miffs me about it is that I know that it was an amateur hour thing, and then somehow it got published. So now it's like people are going to kind of believe it or whatever. So I came across a story where a guy said that he took an AI and pitted that up against a content writing like warehouse or whatever content team, and then threw in a private writer, right? And so the AI was obviously free. The content team was like $100 or something like that, and then the private writer was $400. And the outcome that he got was that the writer had taken obviously had the best copy with it, and he was like, oh, so glad that it was worth the 400 or whatever. And then the generative AI came in second, and then the copy team came in third, which I found was pretty interesting because it's like, well, so you're saying that the one is better than the many, but the many is better than the few, right? Like, which is just weird.
Yeah.
So there were no further questions asked, which is where it stops for me. And I just kind of throw that out the window because it's like,
You
well,
can't
did
draw
you prime
conclusions
the
from
AI?
that. Yeah,
Right. And it's
exactly.
like, which one did you use? And, how did you like, I get it that they were all asked the same to accomplish the same goal. That's great. That part of it was absolutely perfect. Everything else just kind of like, at least from the generative AI aspect, just kind of went off the rails, right? So to me, I kind of want to. I want to do the same thing, only I want to make it fair from both angles. I want to make it fair from like the human angle and from the AI angle. And so I'm just openly inviting. I would love to. I know that it's very difficult. I realize how difficult it is to do because you're essentially like putting the integrity of your profession on the line per se. But what I would love to do is essentially challenge content writers out there. I would love to, because what I want to do is take three different AI models, two that are the same model, but they're going to be primed differently. The other two won't be primed at all. So what I would love to do is take Claude, take GPT, GPT with a little bit of priming, and then also to use not Pi. What is the other one? Gosh, I have so many of these
Jasper.
things now. No, because Jasper is based on GPT, so I can't really go that route.
See, this stuff for me, I don't even know, right? I know there's
different models. That's what it was. Hugging Chat. Try Hugging Chat, which is sort of like, it's an open source model. I would love to have one that was built off Llama. That would be great, just to see what that's like. But yeah, I want to challenge some writers out there, and just see if it's really true, right? Because I have worked with these, and I only say that because I've worked with these things enough in terms of writing content and creating content that I've fooled people that thought that they could tell the difference, and it's not even trying to fool people. It's a matter of like, can you make these things like as much like you as possible? So one of the things I was going to ask you, and maybe try this with your next conversation with regards to coding. I posted the other day that one of my favorite things to do with the custom instructions is to tell it that you want to work with it in a GAN type style, which is a general adversarial network type style, which is almost what you're doing with GPT, but not necessarily. Remember earlier I was talking about that or not statement that you could throw in? Mm-hmm. This is pretty much like doing that. It's more like D&D with GPT, right? So basically what you'll end up doing is you'll end up asking it for things, and it will give you the answer, but then it will also ask you like, hey, so here are the possible options where we could go with this. Do you want to do that, or do you want to do something else, or do you want to try another method, right? And so what you end up doing is over time refining how it is that GPT is working with you to accomplish this overall goal that you have within the conversation. And as you keep going further and further forward, it keeps getting better and better at producing the result that you're looking for, right? So that's one method of doing it, where you're essentially working with it continually in terms of training it through just the conversation itself. Then you've got, the fact that you could just rip that aspect out of the custom instructions. You could input custom instructions that essentially tell it to try to be the greatest writer throughout history or something like that. You can prime it however you want to in that sense. You have the ability to take the conversation and input straight from the beginning that like, hey, I would like you to take on the persona of, whatever it is, right? There are so many different ways of working with these things. And just like Bob was talking about earlier, garbage in, garbage out. Like it works every single way. It's not just whether you do it with content, it's whether you do it with programming. You're working with an assistant. You have to shake this thing of, I'm working with a machine. You have to like just embrace that you are working with an assistant of some type, that it is very, very human-like. And in that sense, just treat it like another person. If you have an assistant and you tell them, hey, I need you to do this thing, but you don't tell them how, you don't tell them why, you don't tell them in what way or any of that, you're going to get a garbage result because you didn't give enough definition. In the last seconds that I probably have here, I did also want to announce, I'm sure you guys have noticed, that Christine isn't going to visually be with the show. She got a new gig, and very, very, very happy and proud for her for getting it, and very happy and proud for her for making the move, because she really needed to.
Hey,
and so she's moved on to bigger and better things, which is awesome. It's going to leave a little bit of a hole in my heart for the show. But she is also helping me out on the back end with cutting clips and putting things together and doing some promo stuff. So she's still with us in spirit, everybody. Still with us in spirit. That's what I'm trying to say. Bob, I want to thank you so much for being with us today. It was awesome. I'm sorry that the screen share didn't get worked out quite as quickly as it ought to have, but I would love to have you back on to actually like walk us step by step through something.
Yeah, I think because it was a little bit on the fly.
Yeah.
I'll definitely try and have something next time that's more concrete or that we can showcase a little bit more clearly. Yeah, just thanks a lot for having me. It was really cool to chat about this stuff, the code application, but also just AI and ChatGPT in general. So much happening here, and just experiment with it. Doesn't matter how small. There's no right or wrong way to do it. Learn it because you're going to have to. Basically, that's
Yep.
the message I would leave people with.
Do it now before it passes you by.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Everybody have a great weekend. Bob, you have a good one, and we'll talk to you again.
You too, man. Bye.